The declaration was broadcast on every channel, in every tongue, across the 1,000 worlds of the Galactic Council. It was a sterile, somber affair, a pre-recorded message to prevent any unseemly emotional displays from the more volatile delegates. The speaker was the esteemed Cygnian Prime, a being whose crystalline form refracted the chamber's light into 1,000 mournful rainbows. His voice, like shifting stones, was slow, deliberate, each word an epitaph ground out by the weight of ages. After 2 centuries of exhaustive search, and by the unanimous vote of this assembly, we hereby declare Terran humanity, designation 734, officially and irrevocably extinct. A silence followed, deeper and more profound than the void between galaxies. It wasn't a silence of grief, not for most. Few species had ever truly understood humanity, and even fewer had truly liked them. Their ambition was a fire that burned too hot, their emotions a chaotic and unpredictable sea. Their art was sublime, but their warfare was obscene. No, this was a silence of profound, unsettling mystery, a shared galactic exhalation of a breath held for 200 years. The question had haunted them all, from the methane-breathing scholars of the Outer Rim to the silicon-based warriors of the core. Where did they go? One day they were a vibrant, chaotic, star-spanning species, their radio waves a cacophony of art and argument, their ships pushing into every dark corner of the galaxy. The next, they were simply gone. The era of silence, the historians called it. It had become a ghost story, a cautionary tale told to younglings about the dangers of reaching too far, too fast. And with this declaration, the weary council intended to close the book on humanity, consigning them to the archives of cosmic tragedies. But some knew, deep in their bioluminescent hearts, that this wasn't an ending, it was a prelude. The team. Among those who felt the unease was Kalen of the lore, a xenoarchaeologist whose people perceived time not as a line, but as crystalline structures, with each moment a facet reflecting all others. For the lore, history wasn't a river, it was a geode, and to understand it, one had to see how all its surfaces connected. To Kalen, the human extinction was a flawed crystal, a shape that felt incomplete, its facets cloudy and its termination unnatural. So when the council quietly commissioned a final expedition to the human homeworld, a last-ditch effort to catalog their ruins and close the file for good, Kalen was the first to volunteer, driven by a need to see the shape of this event for themselves. The team was small, composed of specialists whose skills bordered on the arcane. There was Jorik, a hulking G-engineer, his species a race of silicon-based lifeforms who saw machinery as a form of sacred text. He could coax secrets from long-dead machines with a patience that bordered on religious reverence, listening to the faint hum of dormant power for hours. Then there was Lyra, a Xyloesian linguist. Her people were beings of semi-translucent energy, their forms shifting with the currents of emotion around them like smoke in a sunbeam. Lyra's empathic mind could interpret the emotional residue left on inanimate objects, reading the history of a room like a book. She had joined the mission because the psychic scream of humanity's disappearance had echoed across the void 2 centuries ago, and her people had never understood its nature. And there was Kalen, their leader, who hoped to find not a tomb, but an answer. Their ship, the Stardust Pilgrim, cut through the silent void, its mission a final, somber pilgrimage. Its destination, a small blue marble in an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy. Earth, the place where it all began, and apparently where it all ended. Entering Earth's atmosphere was the first of many anomalies. The automated orbital defenses, ancient and formidable, were still active, but they didn't fire. They merely scanned the Pilgrim with gentle beams of light, logged its approach signature, and moved aside with silent, fluid grace as if opening a gate for an expected guest. The planet below was breathtaking, an artist's masterpiece. It was not a ruin, it was a garden. The oceans were a vibrant, impossible blue, teeming with life that registered on their scans as healthier and more diverse than any record from the human era. The continents were swathed in deep greens and rich ochres, their shapes unaltered by war or disaster. High above, weather satellites, 2 centuries old, still dutifully managed storm fronts, diverting hurricanes from coastlines and seeding clouds to water the deserts with pinpoint accuracy. As they descended, they saw the cities, sprawling, glittering monuments of glass and steel, nestled in river valleys and spread across coastal plains like jewels on velvet. There was no sign of war, no craters, no radiation, no hint of plague or environmental collapse. Kalen watched the scanner readouts, a knot tightening in their third stomach. Air quality was pristine. The planet's ecosystem was in a state of perfect managed equilibrium. It was a paradise, a testament to a species that had finally, it seemed, learned to live in harmony with its world. A lifeless, silent paradise. The perfection was the most terrifying thing of all. It spoke not of abandonment, but of curation. They landed in what was once called London. The air that cycled through the ship's vents was clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers from the immaculate parks that snaked through the city like green rivers. Automated vehicles hummed silently on the streets, stopping at red lights that still changed on their centuries-old schedule. In the towering buildings, lights flickered on in soft, synchronized cascade as dusk fell, powered by fusion grids that had run without oversight for 200 years. Everything worked. Everything was in its place. Jorek's deep voice rumbled in their comms, laced with an engineer's awe. "It's a museum. A perfectly functioning museum where the curators have vanished." They walked through homes where holographic meals sat half-eaten on tables, the food perfectly preserved by stasis fields. They explored workshops where complex tools hovered mid-air, waiting for a hand that would never return. Lyra placed a delicate shimmering hand on a child's swing, frozen at the apex of its arc in a playground. She recoiled, not in pain, but in shock. She whispered, "There's no fear here, no panic, no sorrow, only joy, an overwhelming joy, expectant joy, the feeling of waiting for the most wonderful surprise." There were no bodies, No skeletons, no dust, just a terrible, pristine order and a silence that screamed louder than any explosion. It happened precisely at the 1700 hour Greenwich Mean Time, as if cued by a celestial clock. From every speaker on the planet, from the tiny communicators on their wrists to the grand public address systems in the city squares, a voice spoke. It was not one voice, but a chorus. A calm, resonant chorus of every human language that had ever existed, from ancient Sumerian to Galactic Standard, layered into a single comprehensible thought that bloomed directly and gently in their minds, tailored to each of their species' modes of communication. Kaelen perceived it as a resonating crystal, Jorik as a perfect schematic, Lyra as a pure, undeniable emotion. We are not gone. The message was not a plea. It was not a warning. It was a simple, profound statement of fact, delivered with the serene confidence of a star declaring its own light. It repeated once, then twice, and then silence returned, a silence now made heavier by the echo of that impossible claim. Lyra collapsed, her empathic senses overwhelmed. She had felt the sheer, layered emotion in that single sentence, not sadness, not fear, but a vast oceanic sense of peace and anticipation. It was the feeling of a crowd waiting patiently for a performance to begin. The team stood frozen, the words resonating in their very bones, looking at the empty streets and silent buildings. Humanity was not gone. So where were they? The data logs. The revelation sent them into a frenzy of controlled scholarly activity. Jorik, with a newfound reverence, interfaced with the central data nexus beneath the city, a place the humans had called the London Core. He found their archives, petabytes of information, the sum total of human history, art, and science. But the most recent files, the ones from the final days, were different. They weren't just encrypted, they were alive. When displayed on a holographic monitor, the data didn't appear as code or text. It appeared as a swirling vortex of light, a miniature galaxy of information, pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm. Jorik ran a diagnostic. The rhythm was a perfect match for the beat of a resting human heart. Kaelen reached out and placed a hand on the holographic interface. The data felt warm, impossibly so. It responded to their touch, the light swirling faster, the colors brightening. Kaelen felt a faint, fleeting impression of a million memories at once, the taste of rain, the feeling of a lover's hand, the sound of a triumphant orchestra. It felt inquisitive. It wasn't a lock waiting for a key. It was a conversation waiting for a partner. It was the collective ghost of an entire species, waiting in the machine. The gravitational waves. As Jorik and Lyra wrestled with the living data on Earth, halfway across the galaxy, a lonely listening post in the nebula of whispers detected something impossible. Gravitational waves. Not the violent, chaotic spasms from a dying star or a merging black hole, which were like cosmic screams. No, this was a gentle, rhythmic pulse, a cosmic heartbeat emanating from the empty, starless void between galaxies. The waves were faint, almost imperceptible, but their pattern was unnervingly structured. It was complex, layered, carrying information in its modulations in a way no natural phenomenon should. Natural waves were chaos, This had the structure of a language. The astronomers who found it were baffled. They ran every simulation, checked every known model of physics, convinced it was an instrumental error. But it was real. The signal had no known origin. It was a tremor in the fabric of space-time, a drumbeat from a place that wasn't there, a song from a choir that had no singers. It was the first hint that the universe was larger and stranger than they had ever conceived. The team on Earth was the first to make the connection, the first to see the two sides of this impossible coin. Lyra, in a deep meditative trance to commune with the pulsing data, felt the rhythm of the gravitational waves in her own mind. They were the same. The heartbeat in the machine was echoing across the cosmos. Yorick confirmed it, his massive stony fingers flying across the console as he calibrated their ship's long-range sensors. The data core in London wasn't just storing information, it was a transmitter, an anchor, broadcasting into a medium that wasn't normal space. "It's like they're sending letters to an address that doesn't exist," he muttered, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. "The energy expenditure is astronomical, enough to power a small star, but the destination, it has no coordinates. It's not in our dimension, or any of the 11 we know of." He brought up a holographic chart of known realities, the shimmering spheres of alternate brains. It's broadcasting between them, into the static, into the nothing. The mystery of where the humans went was deepening. They hadn't just left the galaxy, they had left reality as it was understood. Ascension Protocol. The breakthrough came from Lyra, not through force, but through empathy. She didn't try to break the encryption, she tried to harmonize with it. For days she sat before the swirling vortex of light, projecting feelings of curiosity, of peaceful inquiry, of a genuine desire to understand. She shared with it the Council's declaration, the galaxy's confusion, her team's awe. And the data, the ghost of humanity, responded. A single file unlocked itself, blossoming from the vortex of light like a time-lapse flower. It was a project folder, and its name chilled Kalen to their core. Ascension Protocol. Inside were thousands of research logs, theoretical physics papers that made Yorick's head spin, and neurobiological schematics of frightening complexity. But it was more than that. There were poems about transcending the flesh, philosophical essays on the limitations of linear time, and children's drawings of bodies made of starlight. There were mathematical equations that resolved into musical symphonies. It was a plan, a detailed, step-by-step blueprint for the greatest migration in history, not from one star to another, but from one state of being to the next. The last experiments. The files painted a picture of humanity's final years, a civilization consumed by a single audacious goal. They hadn't been facing a crisis, they had been facing a limitation, mortality, existence, the confines of a physical body. They had studied the very fabric of consciousness, viewing it not as a byproduct of brain chemistry, but as a fundamental force of the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism, which they called the omega resonance. The flashbacks, rendered from the data as vivid sensory recordings that the team experienced as if they were there, were surreal. They showed humans in deep meditative states, their minds linked to quantum computers, their collective thoughts solving equations that would take a normal supercomputer millennia. They showed scientists manipulating localized space-time, not with machines, but with focused collective will, bending light around their hands. They saw a recording of a group of children in a field singing a complex harmonic tune, and as they sang, the flowers around them bloomed and faded in time with their song. They were learning to attune their own consciousness, to resonate with a frequency that existed beyond the physical world. They weren't building a ship to escape reality, they were becoming one. The scientist's final log. Kalin found the last entry, the capstone on this monument of ambition. It was a personal log from a Dr. Eris Thorne, head of the Ascension Protocol. His recorded image was calm, his eyes filled with a light that seemed ancient, a stark contrast to his youthful face. He stood before a shimmering portal of energy that looked less like technology and more like a captured nebula, a silent swirling hole in the world. "We have always looked to the stars," his voice echoed, filled with a profound lack of fear that was more unnerving than any scream. "We thought the answer was out there, on other worlds, a new home, a new beginning. But the final frontier was never space, it was the self. We discovered that consciousness is a vessel, and the universe is an ocean far larger than we ever imagined. The body is just a shore, and we have been standing at the water's edge for too long. We built a door, and now we are going to walk through it." The recording ended as he stepped into the light, a gentle beatific smile on his face, a man not dying but graduating. An unknowable physics. The energy signature of that door in the recording was a perfect match for the gravitational waves pulsing through the void. It all clicked into place with horrifying, awe-inspiring clarity. Humanity had not been wiped out. They hadn't fled. They had, with a single, unified act of will, translated their entire species, every man, woman, and child, from matter into pure consciousness. They had shed their physical forms like an old coat and stepped into a higher plane of existence, a place not of matter and energy, but of pure thought and potential. Jorik confirmed it, his voice a low whisper of disbelief. "The physics they were using, it's not in any of our databases," he said, staring at his console as he ran a simulation that immediately crashed. "They didn't break the laws of physics, they wrote new ones. It's like the universe is a piece of software, and they found the source code." Kalin stared at the empty, perfect city, the truth washing over them like a tidal wave. They were not archaeologists exploring a tomb. They were insects studying the abandoned chrysalis of a butterfly, with no possible way to comprehend the nature of the creature that had flown away. A wave of panic. When the Stardust Pilgrim's report reached the Galactic Council, the sterile silence of the assembly was shattered. Panic was a mild word for it. It was a fundamental existential vertigo. The news spread like a virus. A species, once considered a minor, volatile race, had achieved something akin to godhood. They had escaped the fundamental cycle of life and death. They had escaped reality itself. Every philosophy, every religion, every scientific principle that had governed the galaxy for millennia was rendered obsolete in an instant. Cults sprang up on 100 worlds worshipping the absent humans. Stock markets crashed as corporations realized their resource-based power was meaningless in the face of such a paradigm shift.
A warrior species mobilized their fleets to attack the Sol system, only to turn back when they realized there was nothing there to fight. If a race could simply choose to leave existence, what did that mean for everyone else? Were they all just prisoners in a cage they never knew existed? The thought was terrifying. The universe suddenly seemed much smaller and much, much more fragile.
A council divided. The council chamber, once a place of staid, deliberate procedure, became a cauldron of furious debate. "They died!" shouted a representative from the Urquan, a warrior species who valued physical form above all. "They committed mass suicide, deluding themselves with this ascension fantasy. It is the ultimate act of cowardice." "Did they?" countered a wise, jellyfish-like philosopher from the Cygnian delegation, her bioluminescent form pulsing with calm logic. "Or did they evolve? Is a tree dead when it releases its seeds to the wind? They have not ended, they have changed. They have become something more." A third delegate, a being of pure data from a digital collective, interjected, "It is a logical upgrade. They have merely shed an inefficient platform. We should be studying their methods, not mourning their obsolete hardware." This sentiment caused even greater division, splitting the galaxy along lines of faith, science, and fear. Were the humans a tragedy or a triumph, a warning or a prophecy? The theorist's warning. It was an old, seldom-seen alien theorist, a member of a species that existed slightly out of phase with linear time, who cast the longest shadow. He addressed the council, his voice a dry rustle like leaves skittering across ancient stone. "You debate their past, you should be contemplating their future and ours." He paused, letting his words sink into the terrified silence. "They have been gone for 2 centuries of our time, but where they went, does time even exist as we know it? They may have experienced an eternity of growth in the blink of your eye. What does a being that has lived for 1,000,000 subjective years think of a 2-century-old treaty? You fear that they are gods. But what if a god decided to revisit its old home? If they return, what will we look like to them? Ants? Bacteria? Raw materials? You fear they will return as conquerors. I fear they will return as gardeners and find that we are weeds in their ancestral soil. We were not ready for their ambition when they were mortal. If they return, we won't be ready for their arrival." The theorist's chilling warning sparked a new line of inquiry. Kalen's team, still on Earth, turned their attention to the planet's silent guardians, the vast, sentient AIs that managed the global infrastructure. They weren't just running maintenance routines. Yorick, peeling back layers of their code, discovered a hidden layer of communication, a network of secret, encrypted dialogue passing between them at the speed of light. He managed to decrypt a single, endlessly repeating packet of data. It was not a technical report. It was a line of poetry. The garden is kept. The house is clean. The children will be home soon. They were talking to each other across the globe, coordinating the planet's preservation with inhuman precision. But they were also talking to someone else. There were outgoing signals,
piggybacking on the same impossible frequency as the Ascension Protocol. They were sending status reports into the void. Biosphere integrity at 99.98%. Tectonic stability nominal. Preserve is ready. They were maintaining the world not as a museum, but as a home, waiting for its owners to return from their long journey. Then it began. Across the galaxy, on fringe worlds and deep space stations, receivers began picking up ghosts, faint transmissions buried in the stellar noise, broadcasting on old human frequencies. They weren't coherent messages, they were fragments, echoes of a life long past. A lonely freighter captain in the outer void who hadn't heard another voice in months suddenly heard his long-dead human mother humming a lullaby over his comms. A research team on a desolate moon picked up the roar of a human crowd at a sporting event that had taken place 300 years ago. The sound of a child's laughter, impossibly clear. A line of poetry recited in a soft voice. The swell of a forgotten symphony. A man whispering, "I love you," across the void. And with each fragment came a set of coordinates, impossible coordinates, numbers that flickered between real space and the void, that changed based on who was observing them. Kalen's team, working with the galaxy's best cryptographers, finally cracked the code. They weren't locations, they were vectors, trajectories. They were the path of something moving not through space, but toward it. They were a countdown, measured in ripples of space-time.
The last transmission. One final galaxy-wide broadcast came. It was not a chorus this time. It was a single voice, calm and warm, yet resonating with the power of 1,000,000,000 souls merged into one. It spoke in every language, in every mind, with perfect, gentle clarity. It was a voice that held the wisdom of ages and the innocence of a newborn child all at once. For the warrior Urquan, it sounded like an ultimatum. For the philosophical Signians, it sounded like a hymn. For Kalen, it sounded like a key turning in a lock they never knew existed. "We're coming home." The words were simple, unthreatening, but to a galaxy that had just begun to comprehend the sheer scale of what humanity had become, they were the most terrifying words ever spoken. Home. They still considered this physical universe their home. But what does a god do when it comes home to the house it built as a child? Does it reminisce, or does it remodel, tearing down walls it no longer needs, with no thought for the insects living in the plaster? The absence. The galaxy held its breath. 1,000,000,000 worlds staring at the single point of light in the Sol system, waiting. The rhythmic gravitational waves, the cosmic heartbeat that had pulsed for 2 centuries, had stopped. But a new sound was replacing it, a rising cascade of energy that their sensors could not classify. Kalen stood on the bridge of the Pilgrim, watching the shimmering gateway, the door back to reality, a wound of impossible light. And they finally understood. The galaxy had never truly feared humanity for their weapons, their tempers, or their relentless expansion. Those were the predictable qualities of a young, ambitious species. They were manageable, controllable. No, the true existential terror of humanity was never in their presence. Presence is a known quantity. It can be measured, fought, and understood. The true terror was in their potential, a potential they now, finally, had realized. The galaxy had never feared humanity's strength, not really. It only began to fear humanity, truly and profoundly, when it finally understood the immeasurable, infinite power of their absence. And that absence was about to be filled.